The rain-slicked streets of Brooklyn gleamed under the streetlights, and I was running late again. My breath fogged in the October chill as I clutched a crumpled grocery bag, my sneakers slapping against the pavement. 25 years old, and I was still chasing my own tail, trying to outrun the ghosts of my past. I didn't see him at first. Ethan Caldwell, my high school nemesis, stood leaning against the brick wall outside my apartment building, his blonde hair catching the sodium glow like a halo he didn't deserve. He was the last person I expected to see on my birthday, a day I'd planned to spend alone with a cheap bottle of wine and a playlist of songs that hurt too much to listen to sober. But there he was, all sharp cheekbones and that infuriating smirk, holding a small, wrapped box like it was a grenade he wasn't sure he'd throw. "Happy birthday, Lucas," he said, his voice low, almost drowned by the drizzle. My name on his lips felt like a punch I hadn't braced for. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the fights, the taunts, the way he'd made my teenage years a battlefield. I froze, the grocery bag slipping slightly in my grip. Why was he here? And why did his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, look like they held a secret I wasn't ready to hear? I should have walked past him. I should have told him to go to hell. Instead, I stood there, heart hammering, as he stepped closer, the space between us shrinking to nothing. "You didn't think I'd forget, did you?" he asked, and before I could answer, he pressed the box into my hands. His fingers brushed mine, warm despite the cold, and something in me unraveled. The box sat unopened on my kitchen counter for hours that night, taunting me. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper with a messy bow, like he'd tied it himself. I didn't trust it. I didn't trust him. Ethan had been the golden boy in high school quarterback, prom king, the guy who could charm anyone except me. To me, he was the one who'd mocked my thrift store clothes, who'd spread rumors that followed me like shadows. He was the reason I'd spent senior year eating lunch in the library, hiding from his laughter. But that was 7 years ago. I'd moved on, or so I thought. I'd built a life in Brooklyn, working as a graphic designer, scraping by but proud of it. I had friends, a cat named Jasper, a life that didn't include Ethan Caldwell. So why was he back? And why did that box feel like it held more than just a gift? I poured a glass of wine, the cheap kind that burned going down, and stared at the package. My phone buzzed a text from my best friend. "Mia, you okay? Saw Ethan outside your place. WTF?" I didn't reply. I couldn't explain what I didn't understand. Instead, I grabbed a knife and sliced through the wrapping. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the kind I'd always wanted but could never justify buying. Tucked between the pages was a note in Ethan's messy scrawl. "You always had stories to tell. Maybe it's time you wrote them down." My chest tightened. How did he know? How did he remember the kid who used to scribble poetry in the margins of his notebooks? The kid he'd humiliated. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, those eyes, that smirk, the way he'd lingered like he wanted to say more. I hated how much space he took up in my head. I hated that I didn't hate him as much as I should. The next morning, I found myself walking to the coffee shop where Mia worked, the journal tucked under my arm like a secret I wasn't ready to share. The place was a cozy hole in the wall, all mismatched chairs and the smell of burnt espresso. Mia, her purple hair tied back, spotted me and slid a latte across the counter before I could even order. "Spill," she said, leaning forward, her earrings glinting. "What's with Mr. All-American showing up out of nowhere?" I shrugged, but my hands betrayed me, fidgeting with the journal's edges. "He gave me this," I said, sliding it toward her. She flipped it open, read the note, and whistled low. "Ethan Caldwell. Writing you love letters. This is some rom-com level plot twist. It's not a love letter. I snapped. Too quickly. My face burned. It's just weird. He's weird. Mia raised an eyebrow. Weird like you're mad he showed up. Or weird like you're mad you're not mad. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I felt. All I knew was that Ethan's gesture had cracked something open inside me. Something I'd buried deep. I'd spent years convincing myself I was over the past. Over him. But one look. One stupid gift. And I was 17 again. Heart racing. Wondering why the guy who'd made my life hell was the only one who ever really saw me. That night, I started writing in the journal. Just a few lines at first, angry. Jagged words about betrayal. About pain. But then the words softened. Turned into questions. Why did he come back? What did he want? And why, after all this time, did I care? I didn't see Ethan again for a week. But he was everywhere. In the way the rain fell, reminding me of his voice. In the way my cat stared at the journal like it was cursed. In the dreams that started creeping in. Dreams where he wasn't the enemy. Where his hands lingered longer than they should. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was fine. But then I saw him again. It was at a dive bar in Williamsburg. The kind of place where the jukebox played Springsteen and the beer was cheap. I was there with Mia and a few friends, trying to shake off the week, when I spotted him across the room. He was alone, nursing a drink, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. My stomach dropped. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just held my gaze like he was daring me to look away. I didn't. I couldn't. And when he stood and started walking toward me, I knew this was the moment everything would change. The bar's dim lights cast shadows on Ethan's face as he approached, each step deliberate, like he was crossing a line he couldn't uncross. My friend's laughter faded into static, and all I could hear was my own pulse, loud and unsteady. He stopped a foot away, close enough that I could smell the faint cedar of his cologne, and I hated how it made my chest ache. You gonna keep avoiding me, Lucas? He asked, his voice soft but edged with something raw. No smirk this time, just those eyes, searching mine like they could see straight through to the parts of me I kept hidden. I wanted to snap back, to tell him I wasn't avoiding anything, but my throat felt tight. Words stuck like stones. I didn't ask you to show up. I managed, my voice sharper than I meant. Mia glanced over, her eyes narrowing, but she stayed quiet, watching us like we were a bomb about to go off. Ethan didn't flinch. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at me like I was the only person in the room. I know, he said, but I had to. He paused, his jaw tightening. There's things I need to say. Things I should have said a long time ago. I laughed, a bitter sound that didn't feel like mine. What? Like sorry. You think a journal and a birthday card erase everything? My voice cracked, betraying me, and I hated how small it made me feel. 7 years of silence. And here he was, acting like he could just waltz back into my life. No, he said, stepping closer. Too close. It doesn't. But I'm trying. Lucas. I'm trying to fix what I broke. The bar felt suffocating, the air thick with the weight of his words. I grabbed my jacket and pushed past him, needing space, needing air. Outside, the Brooklyn night was crisp, the city humming with distant sirens and the clink of bottles in a nearby alley. I didn't expect him to follow, but there he was, his footsteps echoing behind me. Lucas, wait, he called, and something in his voice, desperate, almost broken, made me stop. I turned, and he was there, his breath visible in the cold. His hands clenched like he was holding himself back. I was a coward, he said. Back then, I was. I didn't know how to deal with what I felt. About you. My heart stuttered. What are you talking about? I asked. But part of me already knew. Part of me had always known. Hadn't it? The way he'd linger after his taunts. The way his eyes would catch mine in the hallway. Holding on too long. I told myself it was hate. That he was just cruel. But what if it wasn't? I was scared, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I liked you, Lucas. More than I could admit. And I hated myself for it. So I made you hate me too. The world tilted. I stared at him. The boy who'd once been my enemy. Now standing in front of me. Stripping himself bare. I wanted to scream. To shove him. To run. But I didn't. I just stood there. My hands shaking. As he took another step closer. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. But I need you to know I'm not that guy anymore. I'm trying to be better. For you. The walk home was a blur. Ethan didn't follow this time. And I was grateful. Because I didn't know what I'd do if he had. My apartment was too quiet. Jasper's purring the only sound as I collapsed onto the couch. The journal staring at me from the coffee table. I opened it. My pen hovering over a blank page. But no words came. How do you write about a confession that rewrites your entire past? The next day, I avoided the coffee shop. Avoided Mia's texts. Avoided everything. But I couldn't avoid the dreams. They started that night vivid. Relentless. Ethan's face. His voice. The way he'd looked at me like I was something worth fighting for. In one dream, he reached for my hand. His fingers warm and sure. And I didn't pull away. I woke up gasping. My heart racing. The ghost of his touch lingering on my skin. I told myself it was just shock. Just the past messing with my head. But when I saw him again, 3 days later, outside my building, I knew it was more than that. He was sitting on the stoop, a takeout coffee in his hands, looking like he hadn't slept in days. You didn't call, he said, standing as I approached. I left my number in the journal. I didn't look, I said, which was half true. I'd seen the number scrawled on the last page, but hadn't dared to use it. What do you want? Ethan. Really? He set the coffee down, his eyes never leaving mine. I want a chance, he said, to make things right. To know you. The real you. Not the version I was too scared to face back then. I laughed, but it was hollow. You don't know me. You knew a kid you picked on. That's it. I knew more than you think, he said, his voice steady. I knew you were smarter than anyone in that school. I knew you had this fire in you, even when you were quiet. I knew you were different. Like me. The word hung between us, heavy and unspoken for too long. Different. I'd known I was gay since I was 13, but I'd hidden it, buried it under layers of defiance and silence. Ethan, though, he'd been the golden boy, the one who had everything. Had he been hiding too? We ended up walking. No destination. Just moving through the city as the sun dipped low. He told me things I wasn't ready to hear, how he'd left town after high school. How he'd spent years running from himself. How coming back to Brooklyn was his way of facing the truth. He was a carpenter now, working with his hands, building things that lasted. He talked about his family, his sister who'd come out years ago, how she'd helped him see what he'd been too afraid to admit. I listened, mostly. But when I spoke, it was to push back. You don't get to just show up and rewrite the story, I said, stopping by a park bench, the city lights flickering on around us. You hurt me, Ethan. You made me feel like nothing. I know, he said, and his voice broke. I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it if you let me. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. We just stood there, the distance between us shrinking again, and I wondered how long I could keep pretending I didn't feel it too. The park bench was cold under my hands, but I didn't move. Ethan stood a few feet away, his breath visible in the chilly air. His eyes locked on mine like he was waiting for me to bolt. I wanted to run from the way my heart kept betraying me, pounding like it had something to prove. I don't know what you expect, I said finally, my voice rough. You think you can just confess and everything's fixed. It doesn't work like that. I know, he said, shoving his hands deeper into his pockets. I don't expect anything, Lucas. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't care. Not after all this time. His words hung there, heavy, and I hated how they made me feel angry, exposed, but also something else, something warm and dangerous. I stood, needing to move, needing to shake off the way his voice wrapped around me. We walked again, the city a blur of lights and noise, and he stayed close, not pushing, just there, like he'd always been there, waiting for me to see him. The next few days were a haze. I threw myself into work, sketching logos for a client who kept changing their mind. But Ethan was everywhere in the lines I drew, in the quiet moments when my mind wandered. Mia noticed. Of course. She cornered me at the coffee shop, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp. You're spiraling, she said, sliding a muffin across the counter like it was a peace offering. Talk to me. What's he doing to you? Nothing, I lied, picking at the muffin. He's just around. Around like a stray dog you keep feeding, she said, not unkindly. You're allowed to feel something, Lucas. But you're also allowed to tell him to back off. I didn't want him to back off. That was the problem. I wanted to hate him, to hold on to the anger that had kept me safe for years. But it was slipping, replaced by something I wasn't ready to name. I left the coffee shop with her words echoing in my head, but no answers. That night, I wrote in the journal again. Pages of confusion, of questions I couldn't ask out loud. Why does he make me feel like this? Why can't I let it go? The words poured out, raw and messy, and when I finally stopped, my hands were shaking. I didn't know who I was writing to Ethan, myself, or the boy I used to be, the one who'd believed he wasn't worth loving. The dreams got worse. In one, we were back in high school, but instead of taunting me, Ethan was smiling, pulling me into an empty classroom, his hand warm in mine. I woke up breathless, my skin burning, and I hated how much I wanted it to be real. A week later, I ran into him at the farmer's market. Of all places. He was buying apples, his sleeves rolled up, his arms dusted with sawdust from whatever he'd been building. He looked so ordinary, so human, and it disarmed me. When he saw me, his face lit up, and I cursed myself for the way my heart leapt. Hey, he said, holding up an apple like it was a peace offering. Want one? I shook my head, but I didn't walk away. We ended up wandering the stalls together, the crowd buzzing around us. And for a moment, it felt easy, like we were just two people, not a past and a present colliding. He told me about his work, how he loved the feel of wood under his hands, how it was the only thing that made sense when everything else fell apart. I told him about my designs, the way I could lose myself in a sketch, and he listened like every word mattered. By the time we reached the end of the market, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. We stopped by a food truck, sharing a greasy basket of fries, and I caught myself laughing at something he sighed, a real laugh, not the bitter one I'd used as a shield. He noticed, and his smile was so soft it hurt. You're different now, he said, his voice quiet. Stronger. Braver. I looked away, my throat tight. I had to be. I know, he said, and when I looked back, his eyes were full of something I couldn't name. Regret. Maybe. Or hope. That night, he walked me home. The streets were quiet, the city holding its breath, and neither of us spoke much. When we reached my building, I turned to say goodbye, but he was closer than I expected, his face inches from mine. My heart stopped. Lucas, he said, and his voice was a whisper, a plea. Before I could think, before I could stop him, he leaned in and kissed me. It was soft, tentative, like he was afraid I'd break. His lips were warm, tasting faintly of salt from the fries. And for a moment, I let myself feel the ache, the longing, the years of wanting something I couldn't have. Then I pulled back, my breath ragged, my hands shaking. Why? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Because I've wanted to do that since I was 16, he said, his eyes searching mine. And I'm done being scared. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to feel. So I turned and went inside, the memory of his kiss burning through me, haunting every step. The door clicked shut behind me, but it didn't block out the weight of Ethan's kiss. My apartment was too small, too quiet, and Jasper's curious stare from the couch felt like an accusation. I stood there, my back against the door, heart pounding so hard I thought it might break free. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt his lips on mine, soft and searching, rewriting every memory I had of him. The dreams were worse now, vivid, relentless, pulling me into moments that never happened but felt so real I woke up gasping, my hands reaching for something that wasn't there. Ethan, smiling. Ethan, holding me. Ethan, whispering my name like it was the only word that mattered. By morning, I was a wreck. My phone buzzed with a text from him. I'm sorry if I crossed a line. Can we talk? I stared at it for an hour, my thumb hovering over the screen. But I didn't reply. What was I supposed to say? That his kiss had unraveled me. That I was terrified of what it meant. Mia dragged me out for brunch, her eyes sharp as she watched me push eggs around my plate. You look like you got hit by a truck, she said, sipping her mimosa. Spill. Now. I told her everything, the market, the fries, the kiss. Her eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. Just let me talk until the words ran dry. When I finished, she leaned back, whistling low. Well, damn, she said. That's a lot. What do I do? I asked, my voice small. I can't stop thinking about him. But he's Ethan. He's the guy who made my life hell. Yeah, and he's also the guy who's clearly in love with you, she said, blunt as ever. People change. Lucas. Maybe he has. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but the truth was clawing at me. Ethan wasn't the same. He was still cocky, still too sure of himself. But there was something else now, something vulnerable, something real. And I couldn't shake the way he'd looked at me, like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking for years. I avoided him for days, burying myself in work, sketching until my hands cramped. But he was persistent, leaving voicemails I didn't listen to, texts I didn't answer. I'm here when you're ready, one said. I'll wait. I hated how those words made my chest ache, how they made me want to believe him. On Friday, I broke. I called him, my hands shaking as the phone rang. He picked up on the second ring, his voice warm and cautious. Lucas, can we meet? I asked, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Somewhere neutral. The park. He agreed. And an hour later, we were sitting on a bench in Prospect Park, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot. He looked nervous, his hands fidgeting with a stray leaf, and it made him seem smaller, less like the untouchable golden boy I'd built up in my head. "I'm sorry," he said, before I could speak. "For the kiss. For everything. I didn't mean to push you." "You didn't," I said, surprising myself. I don't know what this is. What you want." He looked at me, his eyes steady. "I want you," he said, simple and raw. "I always have. I was just too stupid to admit it." My breath caught. I wanted to laugh it off, to tell him he was crazy, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I asked, "Why now? Why after all this time?" "Because I'm done running," he said. "I came back to Brooklyn to fix things. To fix us. If you'll let me." We talked for hours, the park emptying around us as the sun sank low. He told me about the years after high school, the confusion, the fear, the slow realization that he couldn't outrun who he was. He'd dated women, tried to fit the mold everyone expected, but it never felt right. Not like it did when he thought about me. I told him two things I'd never said out loud. How I'd known I was gay but hid it. How his taunts had cut deeper because I'd wanted his approval, his attention. Even then, it was messy, painful, but it felt like untying a knot that had been choking me for years. When we finally stood to leave, the air was colder, the stars just starting to show. He reached for my hand, hesitant, and I let him take it. His fingers were warm, steady, and for the first time, I didn't pull away. That night, I wrote in the journal again. Not angry words this time, but hopeful ones, tentative ones. I wrote about forgiveness, about second chances, about the way his hand felt in mine. The dreams were softer now, less frantic, but they still left me breathless, his kiss lingering like a promise. I wasn't ready to trust him completely. Not yet. But I was ready to try. Holding Ethan's hand in the park had felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly irreversible. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my window, Jasper curled at my feet, and a text from Ethan, "Coffee today." My treat. My heart did a stupid little flip, and I hated how much I wanted to say yes. I met him at a diner in Greenpoint, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and waitresses who called you hon. He was already there, sitting by the window, his blonde hair catching the light. When he saw me, his smile was shy, almost boyish, and it chipped away at the walls I'd spent years building. "You look good," he said as I slid into the booth, and I rolled my eyes to hide the warmth creeping up my neck. "Don't get used to it," I said, but my voice was softer than I meant. We ordered coffee and pancakes, and for a while, it was just easy. We talked about nothing: movies, music, the way Brooklyn had changed since we were kids. But under it all was a current, a pull, like the air itself was charged. Over the next week, we fell into a rhythm. Coffee dates turned into walks. Walks turned into late-night talks on my stoop. Ethan was careful, never pushing too far, but every glance, every brush of his hand, felt like a question, and I was starting to answer. One night, he showed up with a takeout bag from my favorite Thai place, his grin lopsided as he held it up. "Figured you might be sick of my cooking stories," he said. We ate on my couch, Jasper stealing bits of chicken, and when Ethan laughed, his shoulder brushing mine, I felt something settle in me. Something like peace. But peace was fragile. The dreams kept coming: his kiss, his hands, his voice, but now they were tangled with fear. What if this was a mistake? What if he hurt me again? I'd spent so long protecting myself, and letting him in felt like handing him a knife. Mia saw it too. We were at her apartment, sprawled on her couch with a bottle of wine, when she fixed me with a look. "You're falling for him," she said. Not a question. "I'm not." I lied, but my voice was weak, and she knew it. "Lucas," she said, softer now. "You don't have to be afraid. Not everyone's gonna break you." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe Ethan. But trust was a muscle I hadn't used in years, and it ached every time I tried. The turning point came on a rainy Saturday. Ethan invited me to his workshop, a small space in Dumbo filled with the scent of sawdust and varnish. He was working on a table, his hands steady as he sanded the wood, and I watched, mesmerized by the care he put into every movement. "You're good at this," I said, running my fingers over the smooth grain. He smiled, wiping his hands on his jeans. "It's the only thing that keeps me grounded," he said, "when everything else feels like it's falling apart." I wanted to ask what he meant, but he turned to me, his eyes serious. "I made something for you," he said, leading me to a corner of the shop. There, on a workbench, was a small wooden box, carved with intricate patterns. He opened it, revealing a space just big enough for the journal he'd given me. "It's for your stories," he said, "so they're safe." I didn't know what to say. The box was beautiful, thoughtful, a piece of him. I reached for it, my fingers brushing his, and the air shifted. He was close, too close, and when he leaned in, I didn't pull away. This kiss was different, slower, deeper, like he was pouring everything he couldn't say into it. I kissed him back, my hands finding his shoulders, and for the first time, I let myself want it. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath uneven. "I don't deserve this," he whispered, "but I'm gonna try to." I didn't have words, so I kissed him again, softer this time, and it felt like a promise. Not to him, but to myself to try, to trust, to let myself feel. That night, I wrote in the journal, the box beside it on my nightstand. The words were different now, hopeful, alive. The dreams were still there, but they didn't haunt me anymore. They felt like a map, guiding me towards something new. The wooden box sat on my nightstand, a quiet reminder of Ethan's hands, his care, the way he'd looked at me in the workshop. I was falling, and I knew it, falling for the boy who'd once been my enemy, who'd somehow become the center of my world. But falling meant trusting, and trust was a tightrope I was still learning to walk. We spent more time together, each moment stitching us closer. Dinners at hole-in-the-wall restaurants, walks along the Brooklyn Bridge, quiet nights on my couch with Jasper purring between us. Ethan was patient, letting me set the pace, but his touches, his hand on my back, his fingers grazing mine, were a constant reminder of what we could be, what we were becoming. One night, he took me to a rooftop bar in Williamsburg, the city skyline glittering below us. The air was crisp, and he draped his jacket over my shoulders, his warmth lingering in the fabric. "You're shivering," he said, his voice soft, and when I looked at him, his eyes were so full of feeling it stole my breath. "Why do you keep doing this?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the hum of the city. "The gifts, the dinners, all of it. Why me?" He leaned against the railing, his gaze steady. "Because you're worth it, Lucas. Because I spent years being too scared to see it, and I'm not making that mistake again." The dreams were softer now, less like hauntings and more like promises. In one, we were dancing slow, clumsy, in a room I didn't recognize, his arms steady around me. I woke with a smile, my heart lighter than it had been in years. But the fear was still there. A shadow that followed me, whispering that this was too good, too fragile to last. Mia saw it. Of course. We were at the coffee shop, her pouring drinks while I sketched in the journal. "You're glowing," she said, smirking. "It's gross." "Shut up," I said, but I was grinning. "I'm just figuring it out." "Figure faster," she said, tossing a rag at me. "He's good for you. Don't sabotage it." I wanted to tell her I wasn't, but the truth was, I didn't know how not to. I'd spent so long guarding my heart, and letting Ethan in felt like tearing down a house I'd built brick by brick. A week later, we hit a snag. It was small. Stupid, a canceled plan because Ethan had to finish a project. But it spiraled. I was tired, stressed from a client who'd rejected my designs. And when Ethan texted to reschedule, I snapped. "Maybe you're not as committed as you think," I typed, hitting send before I could stop myself. His reply came fast. "Lucas, don't do this." "I'm trying. Can we talk?" I didn't answer. I turned off my phone, buried myself in work, and tried to ignore the ache in my chest. But by midnight, I was pacing, Jasper watching me like I'd lost my mind. I knew I was pushing him away, testing him, waiting for him to prove he'd hurt me again. He showed up at my door an hour later, his hair damp from the rain, his eyes tired but fierce. "You can't keep running," he said, stepping inside before I could stop him. "I know I messed up before, but I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stepped forward, closing the distance, and kissed him. It was desperate, messy, all the fear and one I'd been holding back. He kissed me back, his hand steady on my waist, and when we pulled apart, I was shaking. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I know," he said, his forehead against mine. "Me too. But we'll figure it out. Together." That night, we talked until dawn about the past, the future, the messy in-between. He told me about his fears, how coming out to his family had been a battle, how he'd almost lost himself trying to be someone he wasn't. I told him about my own struggles, the years of hiding, the loneliness that had become a second skin. It was raw, painful, but it felt like healing. I wrote in the journal before bed. The box opened beside me. The words were a confession, a hope, a promise to myself to keep going, to keep trying. The dreams that night were warm, Ethan's laughter echoing through them. And for the first time, I didn't wake up afraid. The morning after our fight, Ethan was still there, sprawled on my couch with Jasper curled against him. The sight of him, hair messy, shirt wrinkled, eyes soft as he looked at me, felt like a gift I didn't deserve. I made coffee, the silence between us comfortable for the first time. And when he smiled, it was like the sun breaking through clouds. We were careful after that, both of us tiptoeing around the edges of something new. Dates became routine, pizza nights, walks through the park, quiet moments in his workshop where I'd sketch while he worked. Each one built something stronger, something I could almost believe in. But the fear never fully left. A quiet hum in the back of my mind, waiting for the moment it would all fall apart. One evening, he took me to meet his sister, Claire. She lived in a tiny apartment in the East Village, walls covered in her own paintings, bold, colorful abstracts that felt like her. She was warm, sharp, and didn't hesitate to call Ethan out when he got too cocky. "So, you're the one who's got my brother all soft," she said, grinning as she handed me a beer. Ethan flushed, and I laughed, the tension in my chest easing. Claire told stories about Ethan as a kid, about her own coming out, about how he'd called her crying when he realized he couldn't keep pretending. "He's a good guy," she said later, when Ethan was in the kitchen. "He just took a while to figure it out." I nodded, my throat tight. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe in him. The dreams were a constant now, but they'd changed. No longer just kisses or fleeting touches. They were moments Ethan and me in a house we didn't own, laughing over breakfast, building a life. They felt so real I woke up disoriented, reaching for him, only to find Jasper's warmth instead. But the dreams weren't just fantasies. They were a challenge, daring me to let go of the past and build something new. Mia noticed the change. "You're happier," she said one day, wiping down the coffee shop counter. "It's like you're finally letting yourself breathe." "I'm trying," I said, and it was true. Every moment with Ethan was a choice to trust, to hope, to let myself feel. But it wasn't easy. The past was still there, a shadow that lingered in quiet moments, reminding me of the boy who'd hurt me. One night, Ethan took me to a quiet spot by the river, the city lights reflecting on the water. He was nervous, fidgeting with a small velvet bag in his hands. "I made something else," he said, pulling out a carved wooden pendant. Simple but beautiful, shaped like a star. "It's for you," he said, "to remind you you're not alone." I took it, my fingers tracing the smooth edges, and something in me broke open. "Why do you keep doing this?" I asked, my voice thick. "Why do you keep giving me things?" "Because I love you," he said, simple and sure, like it was the easiest thing in the world. "I've loved you for years, Lucas." I was just too stupid to say it. The words hit like a wave, knocking the air from my lungs. I stared at him, the pendant heavy in my hand, and for the first time, I didn't doubt him. I stepped forward, kissing him under the stars, and it felt like coming home. That night, I wrote in the journal, the pendant around my neck, the box open beside me. The words were a vow to him, to myself, to the future we were building. The dreams were brighter now, full of possibility. And when I woke, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. Ethan's confession by the river changed everything. "I love you" wasn't just words, it was a bridge, spanning the gap between who we'd been and who we were becoming. I wore the star pendant every day, a quiet reminder of his promise. And for the first time, I let myself believe in it. We were inseparable after that. Weekends were spent exploring the city, his hand in mine, his laughter a sound I didn't know I'd been missing. We cooked terrible dinners in my tiny kitchen, danced to old records in his workshop, and talked about everything: dreams, fears, the future. It wasn't perfect. We argued. We stumbled. But we always came back to each other. One night, we went back to the dive bar where it all started, the jukebox playing Springsteen as we sat in a corner booth. Ethan reached for my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my skin, and I realized I wasn't scared anymore. The past was still there, but it didn't define us. We were writing a new story, one kiss, one moment at a time. "I want this," I said, my voice steady. "You. Us. All of it." He smiled, his eyes bright. "Good," he said, "because I'm not letting you go." Months later, I filled the last page of the journal. It was a letter to the boy I'd been, the one who'd felt so alone, so unworthy. "You made it," I wrote. "You found love. You found him." I placed the journal in the wooden box, the pendant warm against my chest, and closed the lid. It wasn't an ending, but a beginning. The dreams never stopped, but they weren't hauntings anymore. They were glimpses of a life I was building, with Ethan by my side. We weren't perfect, But we were real, and that was enough. On my next birthday, Ethan threw a party at his workshop, string lights glowing, friends and family filling the space with laughter. Mia toasted us, her eyes misty, and Claire hugged me like I was already family. Ethan pulled me aside, his hand in mine, and kissed me under the lights. "Happy birthday," he whispered, and I smiled, knowing this was only the start. The past had shaped us, but it didn't own us. We'd found each other, against all odds, and every kiss, every dream, was a promise to keep going. Together.